All right, welcome to NieuwRechts, for our English listeners, NieuwRechts. My name is Daniël de Liever, and I'm happy to introduce you today, and I hope I say your name right. András László, if I say it right. You are a member of the parliament for the Hungarian party Fidesz in Europe. Thank you for taking the time to join me today.
Hello, nice to see you, nice to talk to you, and hello to the viewers.
Yes, in the Netherlands, I would say Hungarian politics is quite unknown, besides some negative things in the mainstream, a little bit leftist media. So I'm happy to hear another side today. But before we get into, let's say, the European and the Hungarian politics, I'm also curious to know, why did you actually get into politics?
Well, I was working for 15 years, to some degree, in international relations. I've worked in civil service, and I've worked in politics starting 2014, when I first came here to the European Parliament as an advisor. And I thought that, a lot of things that matter in our daily life is decided at European level. And I said, I want to engage in this. I want to represent my people. I want to represent Hungarian interests. I want to represent Hungarians. And I thought, this is a great place to do it. I have experience in it. I'm trained as a international relations expert, and I thought this is the best I can do for my country and for Hungarian people.
Great to hear, and I can imagine it's not always easy to be a politician. So, what has been like to you the biggest challenge in being a politician?
I think the biggest challenge is especially here in the European Parliament, is how much people don't care about the facts. People are very opinionated, which is fine. Politicians go into politics because they want to achieve something and they have a vision. What's surprising really is how little facts and evidence matter, and let's say wishful thinking always overcomes pragmatism and reason.
Yes, I think in general in our time, this is certainly true all throughout Western societies. Do you feel like, you said you are doing this because you want to be present and do the best for your country? Do you feel like you actually have been able to make a difference as a politician?
Well, I've been only elected since July, so I don't have a very long political career behind me. But I think there's a lot of issues on which I can make an impact. Hungary has had policies which drew a lot of international attention, starting from the migration crisis to our pro-family policies. And also, what is the most important at European level is how European economy is doing, because the life in each of our member states is very much determined about how the whole community of our countries is doing and what are our prospects. So, as a politician, I want to do something to overcome the crises the European Union is facing right now, in order to make not only Hungary a better country, but also to make all of the European Union develop and stay an important and relevant player at international level.
Vergeet de NOS en de NPO. Het is tijd voor NieuwRechts, de nieuwswebsite voor rechtsdenkend Nederland.
I think it's a good point. I think a lot of people are worried about the many crises we have in Europe. We'll go into that in a second. I'm curious. You said, of course, you had to move to Brussels to do this. So how has it been? I can imagine Brussels is very different from Hungary.
Yes, it is. I commute. I didn't want to risk becoming disconnected with Hungarian voters and Hungarian life. So I commute every week to Brussels, or when it's a plenary week like this week, to Strasbourg. So I spend 3-4 days, sometimes more, abroad a week in order to do this job. But, I think it's a very exciting job. The fact that there are so many countries and so many interests present and so many opinions present in the European Parliament and in the European institutions, it makes for a very vibrant, professional and political atmosphere, where you hear a lot of stuff that otherwise you wouldn't hear in your national media. I don't know how often, for example, you do interviews with Hungarian MPs or MEPs. I think not very often. And I think, Hungarian political voices don't necessarily penetrate Dutch public life. But that's a very good thing in the EU and in Brussels and in Strasbourg, is that even though you might not hear a lot from other countries through the media, here you have discussions with experts, you have discussions with lobbyists, you have discussions with NGOs, and you have discussions, of course, with your fellow members of the European Parliament. So you hear a lot of explanations, you hear a lot of details, you hear a lot of facts that otherwise would never reach you.
That's very true. Although the other way around, and that's why I think the media is important. Let's say the Dutch public, for them it's very hard to access this other information from the Hungarian perspective. I think that's why we, for example, try to talk to countries that get criticized a lot. Like Poland used to be that under the Fidesz government. Hungary, I think, under Viktor Orban is still like that. You said you just started your political career. So what do you want your legacy to be? What do you want to aspire in Brussels when you leave, so you can be satisfied?
I've never thought about what legacy I want to leave. I'm more thinking about the challenges ahead and what I can do for Hungarian citizens. If Hungarian citizens, let's say, in 5 years, say they want to see me back in office and for another term, I would say, mission accomplished for this 5 years. It's really, I take representation seriously. I want to represent what Hungarians want. I don't want to follow some kind of left-wing or liberal kind of politics where politicians and elites think that their job is to educate the people. I think, Hungarians have a very good sense, and I think all people have a very good sense of what they want and what their interest is. And it's a job as a representative for me and for the other 719 people here to represent national will, because based on national interest and the interest of citizens and what representatives can bring here as a voice, if that's the voice they bring here, that's a good solid ground for cooperation and finding mutual interest and finding ways to cooperate. I don't think lecturing each other or trying to educate voters that they're wrong about what they think is right for them is a bad approach to politics. Unfortunately, it's tending more and more in this way. I want to take representation seriously. I want to represent Hungarian people and Hungarian interests. And I would be very glad without any major legacy, just people saying that I did a good job in this term.
It's good that you take it seriously. Like many people nowadays, especially more on the left, they would call what you just phrased as populist, in general, this is, like you said yourself, people think they sometimes know better, so certain politicians. How would you respond to, let's say, the populist attitude that people describe, let's say, Hungarians as?
Populism and populist is usually used in a very negative way nowadays in the last couple of years. But the way I see it, populism essentially just means that you have to represent the people. And in that sense, that's the core of democracy, is that you elect people who will represent you. Because let's say Hungary is a country of 10 million people. The Netherlands is a country of 16 million people. You cannot always have all the citizens gather in an assembly to decide about matters of the country. That's why we elect representatives. I don't see that as anything negative, whichever way populists do it. I think what people usually misinterpret populism for demagogy, which means, you promise things you cannot achieve. I want to promise things which voters expect from me that I will try and deliver on that. I think that's how democracies should work.
That's a fair point. Let's get a little bit more in Hungarian politics. Hungary, in some sense, is seen by both the left and the right as like an outlier in Europe. Some, predominantly on the left, you see Hungary as a country that should be criticized, and the more conservative side see a lot of inspiration and things you already said: immigration policy, family policy. Other contested points, of course, are relationships with Russia and China. These are, I think, for especially some countries and some politicians, quite problematic. Do you think there's any merit to the criticism that you often hear about Hungary?
Well, you've raised a lot of issues here. Very shortly, should we go one by one, or how should we approach this?
Yeah, at first I would like to hear if you think there's merit in general to this leftist criticism of Hungary, and then I want to get into the specific issues with you.
No, there's absolutely no. It's not worthy to actually deal with criticism, with this kind of leftist international criticism. Every country should decide their own fate. Every people should decide which government and what policies they want in their own country. I understand, although, that in Europe it is not a trend to now have a majority conservative government. That's simply not the case. There are more and more, let's say, conservative and liberal, conservative green or conservative socialist coalitions in the last decade in Europe. But that's merely a fact of let's say, the fragmentation of the political landscape throughout Europe. For in many countries, we used to have one big right-wing party, one big left-wing party, and maybe a third or fourth smaller parties, which would join a coalition with one side or the other. What happened in the last couple of years is that because these big parties mismanaged the crises we faced, from financial crisis to Eurozone crisis to migration crisis, to the COVID situation and the pandemic, to the sanctions and the war now in Ukraine, people are getting angry because of the inflation, etc. People are getting angry, and they feel like the parties which traditionally represented them no longer represent them, or they've gone into alliances and they gave up on their values, which they used to defend. And therefore, we've seen new parties emerge both on the left and on the right. And so in this European political situation, Hungary is unique, I think, in the way that we have been able to remain a very solid majority government without the need for compromises with liberals, for compromises with socialists or with the Greens, because we have an absolute majority in parliament. This gives us a lot of possibility to enact policies we want. It allows us to say no to liberal criticism from outside, because they don't have significant support politically. And of course, this is unheard of also in the European Parliament. I don't remember when was the last time there was a conservative majority in the European Parliament. The European Parliament was usually following the grand coalition model of Germany of the 2010s. Obviously, our policies are more conservative because we don't have to make such compromises. But that's a choice of the Hungarian people, and that's also, I say, let's say, a confirmation by the electors from election to election, by the voters, that they are satisfied with the job we have done, and they trust us for the next cycle to deliver on whatever we promise to deliver, and what are the values we want to defend. This is unusual in Europe. There used to be such a conservative majority government in Poland until recently. It was also very heavily criticized for the same reason. But that's a fact of life. We have to respect, international cooperation in general, but also between EU member states. We have to give mutual respect to each other, that you decide what is your interest and what policies you want your government to pursue in a country. We have to respect the will of the voters, just like we never criticize how other countries and how other people in other countries vote and what kind of government they elect. We don't agree. We don't think that might be the right case, but we don't pretend to know better what is best for Holland, for example.
It's a good point. Yes, in Holland we have very much a coalition, probably of like 4 parties on average, I would say, for the longest period of time. You said that you want to do what the Hungarian people want to do. Of course, one of the hot issues for a long period of time is already immigration. I think more and more people in Europe, no matter if it's Austria, Germany, France, the Netherlands, and of course Hungary itself, would like less immigration. But Hungary, one of the countries that already from the beginning, when we had the immigration crisis, said we're not going to take mass migration. Can you explain why this is the case and what the result in your experience has been?
Well, Hungary has had lots of workers from the 90s, 2000s, but even before we were a member of the European Union, and afterwards even more, who went abroad to work, mostly to Austria, to Germany, and of course to farther countries as well, to the UK, to France, to Belgium. And we saw what's going on in terms of immigration, where decades of mass immigration leads to, what kind of social tensions they lead to, what kind of cultural change it leads to. And Hungary said, when this was not a big issue in Hungary, we didn't have a mass importation of foreign labor. But in the 1990s and 2000s, in fact, what we were struggling with was high unemployment. And so we didn't need to import workers. And then obviously in 2014, 2015, when the mass immigration crisis started in Europe, Hungary was one of the main transit countries through the Balkan route. Everyone now talks about, of course, the Mediterranean and how ships are coming in with migrants into Italy. Now they're going into the Canary Islands in Spain. And of course, this is a regular pressure. But in 2015, 16, and starting already in 14, there was a surge also on the Balkan route. So people coming in through Greece, through Serbia, into Hungary. And Hungary has our external border is also the external Schengen zone border. And we've seen hundreds of thousands of people trying to come in. And we said, well, we have an obligation to register whoever is trying to enter the Schengen zone. That's EU regulation, which we must respect. Second, we saw the behavior of these people, just throwing away trash, not allowing any kind of acceptance of help or guiding them what to do. They would refuse to register. They were just running through the green border, through the fields, through the forest, trying to get into Hungary and the Schengen zone, because they knew that once they enter Hungary, there's borderless Europe within the Schengen zone. And we simply said, we don't want this lawlessness. We don't want this lawlessness on our border. We don't want this lawlessness throughout the country, because they were going through Hungary several hundred kilometers. There were very shocking images in Budapest East Railway Station. And afterwards, they started marching towards, on the highway, they started marching towards Austria. We saw this is, in a civilized country where you have rule of law, this cannot happen, that hundreds of thousands of people are just without documentation, without any kind of permit to enter the Schengen zone, are allowed to walk in. And we said, we had the toughest line on immigration back then. We said, we'll have zero illegal entry. We'll erect a border fence. We'll erect control spots. And we will only allow people in who come legally with their passports, with their IDs, doing trade, commuting to work through Serbia and Hungary. And if people want to seek asylum, well, they should also register for asylum and not just enter willingly throughout the fields and the green border. This was met when we closed the border, when we erected the fence. This was met with extreme violence from migrants coming in from Serbia. They were throwing sticks, stones, etc., trying to attack policemen. This was all on camera. This was all in the news back then. People haven't forgotten. This is not something we want. If we do want people to fill jobs where we have shortages in Hungary, well, we want to select who those people are and where they come from and whether we trust them. They don't get to decide to come into Hungary or come into Europe at their own will. We want to maintain border controls. We want to maintain rule of law. And this is what we have been doing since almost 10 years now.
And what would you say? Like, there are a lot of people that have more sympathy with mass migration. That would say, people around the world is not as fortunate maybe as people that are born in Europe. So it's like a moral obligation to take in as many people as we can. Instead of what we want, it's about their needs. Well, how would you respond to that?
I believe in sovereignty. I believe in democracy. I believe, that Hungarians should decide who is allowed into Hungary. The Dutch should decide who is allowed into the Netherlands. The Germans into Germany, etc. If your country says you want to help people from around the world, you should do that. But even if Hungary also accepts asylum seekers and refugees, when the Ukraine war started in 2022, since the first day, we've allowed unlimited number of refugees to enter Hungary, for the simple reason is that Hungary is a first safe country for people fleeing Ukraine. And whether they were Ukrainians or other foreign people living in Ukraine, anyone who was fleeing Ukraine was allowed into Hungary. This is very different from people around the world who claim to be refugees, because they cross several safe countries before arriving to Europe. They cross several safe countries, especially when arriving to Hungary, before the Ukraine war, of course. So there's no reason to let them in. They're not actually fleeing bullets immediately when they cross the Hungarian border. So if any country thinks that it wants to help, it needs population, it needs workers, it wants to help people who are unfortunate for any reason in other parts of the world, well, they should get to decide. They should check who these people are and what they can contribute, and how many you want to accept into your country. In Hungary, what we saw is that people who are trying to enter illegally through the south, through our southern borders, are not people who want to integrate or don't even care about Hungary. Most of them just want to transit, etc. And you know, if you think you feel solidarity with whoever from whichever part of the world, you should still check if the story they're telling is true, if they can back up these stories. That's why we have asylum procedures, so they can hand in the claims, so they can prove to some degree with documentation what their situation is. Instead, what we saw is that NGOs actually handed out information leaflets to immigrants on the other side of the border on how best to avoid being detected, on how to, if they are caught, what to say, throw away their documents, and what stories to tell, which will force authorities to grant them protection and allow them into the country. The biggest problem here is if you don't control the external border and you're only doing the checks when they're already in the EU, it's almost impossible to get them out. If they don't have documentation, you can't prove where they're coming from. If you look at the deportation data, so countries, there are hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants in Germany, in France, in Spain, and of course, many more tens of thousands in many other European countries. If they are issued a deportation order, it's almost impossible to execute it because no one is willing to take them back. Their countries of origin. That's a huge problem. So if you let them in, they stay, whether you want them to stay or whether you don't want them to stay. And unfortunately, what we've seen over the years, and of course also in the last few weeks, is that illegal immigrants who applied for asylum, were rejected asylum, were given a court order to leave the country. These orders were never executed. They stay in Europe angry, in an illegal status, and they committed horrific crimes and attacks against Europeans. This is unacceptable. As a politician, I feel that such a system should not be allowed, that we should defend our borders and we should defend our citizens.
I think it's a very good point you're making here, and I think a lot of people would agree in Europe nowadays. What do you think that the average person can do? They want less immigration, maybe in their country, but they don't see actually policy changes happening. What kind of hope can you give, let's say, average Europeans who also would like to see a change on the immigration side?
Don't buy into the fake propaganda of the parties which created this mess, who now promise to fix it.
Good point. Let's turn to, I guess, the relationship between Hungary and Russia. Of course, you already mentioned the Ukraine war. I guess ever since Ukraine war, of course, the tension between Russia and the European Union has been quite big. I think the biggest since the Cold War, for sure. There's a lot of criticism that Hungary takes a more neutral stand in both having relations with Russia and Ukraine. What do you think of the criticism that the European Union has on Hungary for this stance?
Well, the criticism and the pressure from Western European countries and from the European Commission towards Hungary is very clear and very simple. They want us to send weapons to Ukraine. We said that our government said that, we will help Ukrainians. As I said, we opened the border and all the refugees were allowed to come in. They are still allowed to come in. There are thousands a day. We provide humanitarian help. We sent fuel. There were a lot of, people, communities in Hungary organizing charity and donations and sending aid to Ukraine. We've adopted 14 sanctions packages at European level because Hungary also agreed. We are on the list of unfriendly countries of Russia, just like all other EU countries. We're helping Ukraine in all the means we can, except for sending weapons. We said that we are an immediate neighboring country. If we send weapons to Ukraine, then the only way we have a Hungarian minority in Ukraine of about 150,000 people. The Transcarpathia region 100 years ago used to belong to Hungary. It was historic Hungarian land, so there's a lot of indigenous Hungarians living there, ethnic Hungarians still today, and they are living in the region right next to Hungary. So we said if we're sending weapons into Ukraine, it necessarily goes through this region, and so it becomes a logistic target for Russian attacks. We don't want this, and also the conflict between Russia and Ukraine is not our war. We feel for Ukraine for being invaded. We want to help with many means, but this is not our war. We don't want to fight this war. This is also the overwhelming majority of Hungarians share this opinion. This was the main issue. We had general elections in Hungary in spring 2022, so only 2 months after the invasion of Ukraine. And Hungarians, the issue of the war and what to do was immediately jumped to the top of the agenda, of the political agenda, also in Hungary. What is this going to lead to? Will we get involved in this war? Can we be dragged into this war against our will? And obviously, we said this is against our interest. We will help Ukraine, but this is not our war, and we will not join this war, and we will not send weapons into this war. And this was very highly supported by the Hungarian citizens. It remains to be the predominant opinion in Hungary. So we keep with this policy. As I said at the very beginning, we want to represent our people, and this is what we're doing.
Fair point. I guess you don't hear very much about the point you made about the ethnic Hungarians living in Ukraine. I think that's a point that's not very much raised, let's say, in Western European countries.
Oh, sorry, and just one more thing. For Ukrainians arriving to Hungary, we provide, who want to stay, we provide housing, we provide schooling, we provide healthcare, we provide public transport, etc., so they can fit in. We provide healthcare for wounded. We offered healthcare for wounded Ukrainian soldiers. We offered to university and college students who had to flee Ukraine that they can finish their studies. And we recognize a lot of their classes and the years they've done to finish their studies in Hungary. In elementary schools, where possible, we try to organize schooling in Ukrainian language. So we did really the utmost we could in terms of humanitarian aid, in terms of help towards Ukraine, but that's not enough for the European Commission.
Yes, the European Commission is kind of known for having their own will and trying to force it. I think another contested point, of course, is China. And if I understand correctly, you're part of the delegation for relations with China.
Yes.
Especially, of course, in the United States, China is seen as a big threat. And we see that this view of China is also predominant in a lot of European countries. Hungary, of course, has, I would say, in a sense, a better relationship with China. Of course, China is also investing economically in Hungary. How do you look at this relation between Hungary and China?
Look, Hungarian-Chinese relations, diplomatic relations go back 75 years now. If you think 75 years, in Hungary's history, that was mostly during a Soviet-imposed regime in Hungary, during communism until 1990. When the relations between the Soviet Union and China soured, Hungary even then had good relations with China. We never had any historic conflicts with China. We're not the same size. We don't have, conflicting interest. It was always a rather neutral, a relationship based on mutual respect. There was no major conflict in our history. Right now, I see what's going on in the U.S. I see what's going on globally. I understand, the fear in the United States because China in the last 20 years grew into an economic superpower. And they're no longer just cheap labor and manufacturing jobs. They're doing very high-tech stuff now. They do space, they do 5G, they do a lot of software development, they do electric vehicles, they do battery technology, etc. And we are still very much dependent on Chinese manufacturing for our products. It was Western companies who brought a lot of this technology and a lot of this manufacturing and a lot of this investment into China. And they used it very wisely to grow, to develop. They've lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. They've erected huge cities from nothing and total industries. And obviously, they are now a peer competitor. Even if living standards are not the same, in terms of the size and the development of their economy and the know-how, they are peer competitors to the United States. That's obviously a competition, which is a new situation. This is not the post-Cold War 1990s when the West and the United States dominated the entire global economy. This is a new state, and this change is what we see is that this change is speeding up since the Russia-Ukraine war. So obviously this is a new challenge, a new situation. There's a lot of fear, but at the same time, we say, just as we say regarding the Ukraine war, that we should be working to restore peace in Europe, not prolong this war. We should be opening diplomatic channels when there's conflict and when there's tension, instead of closing them. Well, I say the same thing for China. We should look at, ways of cooperation where there is mutual interest, where there's competition, and how we can fairly regulate that, and how we can look forward to the future to avoid conflict, whether it's a new economic Cold War or an actual Cold War. Unfortunately, we need more diplomacy in with a situation with such high tensions, not less.
I tend to agree on the last point, but what I would say, though, one of the main criticisms has also been, of course, about human rights. With China, of course, they have a very different system. They have the one communist Chinese party ruling there. There's been a lot of cases where people criticize the way China handles human rights, and I think this is something that a lot of people fear will maybe influence other countries. What do you think about this fear? Is this also justified or not?
Well, look, we can go and do moral policing of the world, but no one asks us to do it. Obviously, we can help. Democracy. We can help. A lot of people who want to come here, who want to flee whatever regime in the world. We can have discussions about that, but at the end of the day, if we look at the experiments of exporting democracy in the last 20 years, how many successful ones can we really show? I'm very skeptical. I used to work in security policy. I dealt with Afghanistan. I've looked very closely at the war in Iraq. I've also looked at other countries. How many genuine democracies did we install by force abroad or through intervention and color revolutions? Well, remember, just not so long time ago, remember how in the early 2010s, the Arab Spring destabilized the entire Mediterranean region? Is it now fixed? Of course it's not fixed. Is it better now? Is life now better in these countries than it was before? Is Syria better off? Is Iraq better off? These are difficult claims to make. So I'd be very careful when talking about this. You know, and the same thing applies. Even democracies, European democracies and American democracy, we don't have the same electoral system. We don't have the same justice system. We don't have the same economic system. We don't have the same historical experience. You know, each country, each democracy is even a little bit different. We need to respect these differences. And you want to criticize other countries? Sure, you can. But will you really improve the situation by talking, or even when trying to interfere? I think it's a very difficult call to make. And as a Hungarian, as coming from a country of 10 million people, and you know, soon after tomorrow, I think we are at the 21st. We have the anniversary of the 1956 revolution in Hungary against the communist Stalinist regime. We were promised all kinds of things, that we would get Western help, that we should fight for freedom, whatever, and then nothing happened. You know, it's a very dangerous game to become a battleground for great powers. It's not a good situation to be in. I think this is something which should be avoided. But you know, obviously there are different interests, different opinions. What I'm saying is, be careful. Hungarians fought for their freedom. We rebelled against the Soviet occupation, against all odds. We're promised a lot of help, and then we fought for a few weeks, and it was brutally oppressed. Were we better off afterwards? Well, maybe, but at the end of the day, we can only achieve change if we want to achieve it. You cannot achieve change against the will of the majority of the population. We regained independence by our own will and effort, and our development and our transition after socialism to democracy and capitalism was a bumpy road. And each of the former Eastern Bloc countries had a very bumpy road, but different bumpy roads and different developments of democracy and transitioning into democracy. This is something every country has to, fighting for freedom is something every country has to do for itself.
Thank you for pointing that out. I think it's for sure an interesting point. One thing that people often find hard to understand is, of course, Viktor Orban is wildly popular in Hungary. What do you think has been the success for Orban's popularity?
Popular policies. In 2010, we had elections where we won a supermajority. Before that, we had a socialist liberal coalition, which wrecked the Hungarian economy. And then after that wreckage came the 2008 global financial crisis, which put even more pressure on Hungary. So we were the first country in the EU to ask for a EU IMF bailout. What was this bailout was connected to an austerity program. And we promised that we would end the austerity, we would repay the foreign debt, and we would protect Hungarian households and families and individuals against the financial interest and against the financial hardship. And we delivered on this in the first cycle between 2010 and 2014. And then in 2014 and 15, when the migration crisis started, we said, you know, we're going to stop the immigration crisis. We're going to defend our borders. We're going to defend our border towns. We're going to defend our citizens against mass immigration, against the crime, against the looting. And it was wildly popular and supported. And then we after all of this hardship, years of very difficult European and Hungarian economic situation, we managed to fulfill our most important promise, which we made in 2010, is that in 10 years, we'll create 1 million jobs in Hungary. We've decreased to record low levels the level of unemployment. I think people understood the value of that. Instead of social welfare, we gave people jobs. We gave people freedom. Because if you have a job, you have your own income, you are free to spend it, and you are not dependent on the state. You are not dependent on someone else. You're not dependent on creditors. And I think people appreciated this. And by the end of the 2010s, we had very high growth and development in Hungary, which was very much valued. And of course, as I already talked about the 2022 elections, we said we will not allow Hungary to be dragged into this war, regardless what the international pressure is. And people highly supported that. And, we just, I think we managed well in delivering, in making policies which reflect the will of the majority of Hungarian citizens. And not only do we make these promises, we then deliver on them. I think despite faults we may have and errors we may make, people appreciate that we stick with what we said and we deliver on our promises.
Do you think there's an area specifically that Hungary is struggling with at the moment? If there's one policy issue you think that Hungary could improve upon, what would it be?
Well, it's the same thing we see in all of Europe. It's a very difficult, stagnant economic situation. People want to be better off tomorrow than they are today. Everyone wants to be able to take a step forward in their life and hope that, if their children grow up, then they will have a better life than we have today. This is the expectation of everyone. Unfortunately, this is not really the situation today. We have migration crisis. We recently had inflation crisis, but we still have economic stagnation. If you look at the Draghi report presented in September about restoring economic competitiveness in Europe, this is also a challenge in Hungary. We need to boost a lot of investments. We need to make a transition into a modern economy and modern manufacturing throughout Europe. Because of the labor shortage, because of the transformation through technology, through AI, through 5G, etc., we need to make a big economic transition. And we have, of course, the energy crisis as well. Although the question is no longer what was 2 years ago, will we have enough gas or fuel to heat our homes and have our companies, keep our companies open. But we now have energy, but we have much higher energy prices than our global competitors in the US or in China. So how do we keep our European companies competitive globally? This is still not a solved issue. So I think the challenges we face are the same challenges all of Europe faces. And these are restoring peace in Europe, restoring growth. But for that, we need both peace, we need cheap energy prices, and we need to make an economic transition into modern manufacturing.
Those are good points. You already talked a bit about we have many crises in European politics. I guess the last thing I would like to discuss with you is the European politics. We see now in Europe is turning more right or conservative. Why do you think that this is the case?
I don't think European politics is turning more right or conservative. I think what we saw at the European elections, what we saw at the Dutch elections, what we saw at the Austrian elections and the regional elections in Germany is not necessarily a shift towards the right. It's a shift towards common sense policymaking. We cannot continue policymaking, whether it's extreme green ideology or pro-immigration ideology. We cannot continue down this road. We cannot base our policymaking and decision-making on wishful thinking and ideology, because reality will slap us in the face, and it has already slapped us in the face already in many aspects in Europe. I think what we are seeing right now is a shift towards common sense policymaking, towards realism, pragmatism, And I think we should continue on this road. If I just look at my group here in the European Parliament, Patriots for Europe group, where we are now in alliance with the party of Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, what we are seeing is that it's not only parties from the right which joined this group, it's also ANO from the Czech Republic, which used to sit with the Liberals. We came from the EPP group, which used to be the center-right. I think they're more now liberal. We have a new party from Portugal. I think we are able to put together a coalition for this group, which is based on common sense, which is based on reality, and we will defend policymaking based on reality, based on common sense, because this is what people expect. And this is not only a shift on the right. If you look at Germany, the new left-wing party, the BSW, they are also looking at, a break with traditional socialist policies and globalist policies. The main fracture in politics today will be ideology, wishful thinking, mostly on the left, but also to some degree in former conservative parties, and a more common sense-based approach and more sovereignist-based approach in the future. I think the difference between left and right is no longer left and right and conservative socialist. It's more sovereignist, patriotic, common sense against globalist, ideologist, and driven by wishful thinking.
I think that's a good point. I think many more point out that the left right maybe is like the old way of thinking compared to our current situation. I guess the last question I have for you is, a lot of people feel demoralized. They feel like that, for example, in Brussels, there's a lot of centralized power. They feel like either their government cannot make any changes, or they're not willing to make any changes. And people see in their daily lives, they cannot pay their rent anymore. They don't have enough housing. They see their streets changing due to immigration. People are losing hope. And what do you think that for the common people, what the hope of Europe is, and also how can they contribute themselves?
Well, I think there would be less of a conflict between member states and the European Commission if the European Commission also based its policy making and drafting its proposals based on common sense and the reality of Europe, instead of whatever great ideas they have for where the EU should be in the future. We already had plans back in 2000, 2010 on how Europe is going to be the most advanced and knowledge-based and know-how-based and innovation-driven economy in the world. At every turn, we failed on that because it's not enough to set the targets. Then you need to look at, okay, what's the strategy which I'm going to apply to achieve those aims? And those were never made. There was never an honest assessment of what the strengths and weaknesses of the European continent are in terms of natural resources, in terms of population, in terms of just geographic and political surrounding. This is a very, very big problem. We keep on making these wish lists without realism and without a realistic assessment of where we stand today. This is a big problem. Otherwise, you can always have the debate of more centralization or more subsidiarity. And of course, at European level, this is a question of more competences in Brussels and in the European institutions, or more competences with national governments. But when we look at severe crises, now with migration, with energy and economy, people at the end of the day can only hold their own national governments responsible. European citizens don't get to vote on who the president of the European Commission will be, don't get to vote on who the president of the European Council will be, etc. We can only hold our own representatives and our own governments responsible. And when there's crisis, just think of the COVID situation. First and foremost, a lot of people went home because of the difficulties in travel, because they had more trust in their own national institutions to help them and to care for them than they did abroad. This is the situation. I think if we can achieve change at national level in national parliaments and vote for parties, people will vote for parties which want common sense policymaking, then those governments will then force change in Brussels.
Thank you so much for this interview. It's been great to hear a different perspective from what people normally hear in Dutch media. I want to thank you for your time. If people want to follow your work or what Hungary does, where could they go?
Well, I mostly do things on social media. I'm on X, so maybe you can include my username in your video. I mostly post there in English. I mostly deal with European issues, not only Hungarian issues. But of course, I'm always available for questions about Hungary as well. I try to reply when I can. It's really a situation where I think we need to overcome together European challenges in order to improve the situation in our own countries. It would be great if we could have had change at the helm of the European Commission this summer, because I don't trust Ursula von der Leyen to fix the problems she caused in the last 5 years. We need change in Brussels. Patriots for Europe group is the only group who is most outspoken for this kind of change. We'll try to deliver. We'll try to help our parties. I think the Dutch government is also leading the way in terms of migration by asking for an opt-out of the EU migration rules, because the migration rules are totally broken. The entire migration system at European level is now collapsing, with many countries imposing border checks within the Schengen zone. We need change. And the Dutch are showing the way with the opt-out on migration. We have been very critical of European migration rules for a long time as well. We would like to join this opt-out if treaty change becomes possible in the near future. Otherwise, we need to make better policy at European level.
Thank you so much. And also thank you to all our listeners. If you want to support us, please follow us and subscribe on our social media and on our website. Thank you, and see you in the next one.
Thank you for having me.